Hello and welcome to LA Currents. I'm Anita Bennett. Fentanyl overdose deaths have surged more than 1,200% in Los Angeles County since 2016. That's according to a recent report from the county's Department of Public Health. Hospitalizations are up as well, and this crisis is affecting people from all walks of life, including children, teenagers, and the homeless. Joining us to talk about LA's drug epidemic are Bill Bodner, special agent in charge of the DEA here in LA, and trauma surgeon Dr. Reginald Jones. Thank you so much for being here today. Do these numbers surprise you at all?
They don't, unfortunately, surprise me because I've seen it building since 2016. It's a drug threat, the likes of which we've never seen. Fentanyl appearing almost throughout the illicit drug supply chain now.
You work in a hospital. Do you see a lot of these overdoses?
Absolutely, especially it's been an uptake since the pandemic, post-pandemic. We've seen a lot of individuals come in on all kinds of drugs, but fentanyl is reaching on the top.
What are some of the other drugs that folks have taken?
Alcohol, of course, is still number one, and then methamphetamines, followed by opiates, and of the opiates, fentanyl eclipses all the other opiates.
When you listen to these various reports, you hear fentanyl, fentanyl, fentanyl over again. How are these drugs getting into the U.S.?
Yeah, great question. So today, two drug cartels in Mexico are manufacturing the drug, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The chemicals to make the drug come from China. They go to Mexico. The drugs are manufactured in Mexico, and they cross the border up here to the U.S. L.A. is unfortunately a transshipment center for drugs, meaning drugs come to the L.A. area and they're distributed out to the rest of the United States. So unfortunately, we bear a brunt of any new drug issue. We're going to really feel the impact of that here in Los Angeles, greater than a lot of other places in the country.
And you say other places in the country. Is the problem as bad?
The problem on the retail end with overdoses and deaths is worse in a lot of retail cities. Philadelphia comes to mind. Here in LA, it's getting to that point, but what we struggle with here in LA is just the volume of the drugs coming into our community, a lot of it to be shipped elsewhere.
And lately there have been many incidents involving children. Are you seeing more children in the ER?
Yes, we are. When you say children, so there's different groups. So
teenagers, let's start with teenagers.
The adolescent group. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, we are, definitely. And it's like what Bill was saying, it's the access and it's the college students that get a hold of the pills and whatnot, and they don't know what they're taking because it's commingled with other things. And so, yes, we do. There's definitely uptake in that.
And a lot of times I feel like with that age group that the doctor's speaking of, it's self-medication. It's a teenager going through something in his or her life, making a decision to self-medicate and looking for Xanax, perhaps, is the drug that we see. Unfortunately, fake Xanax killing a lot of teenagers. They don't realize that there's no pharmaceutical ingredient in that fake pill that they're buying on social media or buying on the street. They buy it, they take it, and unfortunately, a lot of these teenagers are dying in their home with their parents downstairs.
And you mentioned social media. How big of a role is it playing in this crisis?
It's playing a huge role, and it started during the pandemic. What happened is, and think about how all of our jobs changed during the pandemic. With retail drug sales, the bars were closed. Social gathering places were closed. So where did drug dealers go? How could they stay in business? How could they continue to distribute their drugs? They turned to social media. They knew that that's where our younger generation was going during the pandemic to connect with each other. They went there, they started advertising, they started offering delivery of these drugs, payment by payment apps like Zelle, etc. And really, although the pandemic's over, that model has continued to a great extent, and that's what's putting our young people at risk.
With Zelle, all these various apps, Cash App, PayPal, how does law enforcement stay ahead of this?
I mean, it's just a matter of being there in that marketplace, right? Here's what hasn't changed about drug dealing. In order for any drug transaction to take place, there has to be an agreement between two people. Once that agreement's made, the drugs have to change hands. So that's what we focus on at DEA. We focus on where those agreements are being made, and then those people have to eventually come out from behind the computer, give up the anonymity that the social media platforms provide. They have to come out into public and distribute the drugs, and that's where we go after them. So although it's different, the challenges are the same.
Are you monitoring social media?
Absolutely. We have a team of agents that monitors social media. We're working undercover on social media platforms, and as I said, we do that to entice people out from behind the computer into the, quote, real world.
You mentioned, you know, kind of a mental health crisis as a result of the pandemic. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have the pandemic that layered on to mental health issues, and then we have the opioid crisis that also layers on top of that. And so, yeah, we're seeing a lot of mental health issues in all populations.
What do you tell the families?
Well, first of all, we identify what the mental health issue was, and if it was a drug overdose, and then we provide services. And we have individuals, like at California Hospital, we have an individual called a substance use navigator, and she's a licensed clinical social worker who helps families gain resources to help with dealing with their mental health crisis as it pertains to like opioid overdose and things like that.
And I know the DEA is law enforcement, but you visit various public spaces. What do you tell people?
Yeah, we are law enforcement, but we also recognize that right now education and awareness is number one. That's the thing that we can all do today to save a life today. And I say that because there are a lot of people out there that are being deceived. Deception is a big part of where the harm is coming from. We just spoke about teenagers. They don't know that that Xanax pill is fentanyl. They think it's a real Xanax. Once we can educate people, go into schools, provide knowledge and empower them to make better decisions, our hope is that once they have that information, they're going to make a different choice, a safer choice.
You mentioned going into schools. A growing number of schools are adding Narcan. What are your thoughts on that, both of you?
I think it's a good thing. I think it was something that Governor Newsom had worked on, and now it's in fruition, and they're in the schools, and I think that's a good thing. I think that we need to have the conversation, and it's the kids that are at risk, because half the time they get into stuff, they don't know what they're taking, and so we need to have a safe way of dealing with it and helping them if they do have an overdose episode. So and it begins the conversation.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think everyone should have Narcan. It's readily available now here in California. Yeah. It should be in schools, and really it should be in homes, and it's not necessarily for the person carrying it. It's for the other people that you just may encounter in everyday life.
Are drugs specifically being marketed to kids? You hear about these pills that are colored, like candy coated and whatnot. Is that widespread?
Well, here's what I'll say about that. I know in my generation, the doctor's generation, when we were young, the opiate that was the most dangerous, that was killing people, was heroin. And if I were to take a hypodermic needle, a syringe, and set it on the table with a baggie of heroin and a lighter and a spoon, and then I took a couple brightly colored pills, a yellow one, a blue one, a green one, and put it next to it, and I said, which looks less threatening? Every young person's going to choose those pills. And that's the problem, is the reality is those pills are 50 times more powerful than the heroin. So are they marketing it to children? Not necessarily. They're marketing it in a manner to make it look less threatening to everyone, and children are falling victim to that.
You said 50 times more powerful than heroin?
Correct.
If you were to take heroin, if you took a penny and you covered its surface, it would take 3 pennies to give you an overdose in heroin, pure heroin. Fentanyl, if you took 1 penny and covered Abraham Lincoln's forehead, that would be the lethal dose of fentanyl. I've
heard just like a tiny bit, like on a pin, a pinprick is enough to really do damage. That's true?
2 milligrams, yes.
2 milligrams.
2 milligrams is a lethal dose of fentanyl, especially for the individual who is opiate naive. They've been their system has not been exposed to opiates.
And that's a great point. That's an important point that maybe is missed sometimes with teenagers. When you don't have that opiate tolerance, it takes much less of the drug to harm you or kill you. And right now, we're seeing 60% of the fake pills that are out there, available on social media, available on the streets, 60% of them now, by our laboratory testing, have more than 2 milligrams of fentanyl in them.
That is very, very troubling.
Yeah.
How do you how do you let people know this is so dangerous?
I think that the more we get it out into the vehicles by which the young people use, social media and things like that, we can get the word out. But we have the people that are out, the prints and the individuals, the stars that have succumbed to fentanyl overdoses or things that have been commingled with fentanyl and things like that. So,
you mentioned the celebrities. Those cases certainly make headlines. Does it bring more awareness to the public?
It definitely brings more awareness, and what I've seen is two things happen. There's a portion of the public that recognizes it and says, boy, that's a dangerous thing. I'm going to make a decision not to try that drug or not to use that drug. But there's also another, hopefully smaller group of the population that's the risk taker group of the population. And they are actually going to seek that drug out. They're going to seek that drug out that that person took, and they're going to say, boy, that's the high that I want to chase. And that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the drug taker mentality, I guess.
Almost all young people are on social media. How do you get to them? I know you monitor social media, but is there a positive use for the DEA?
Yeah, we do some work with influencers. We're looking to do more because that's who reaches the young people, and that's a necessary part of this. What I always say is, and I'll say it again, you can't just tell a teenager, don't do this. You have to provide information and empower them to make their own decision. If we don't give them information, we can't necessarily expect them to make the right decision about dangerous drug use.
We've certainly addressed fentanyl, but there are many, many other drugs that people are taking. What about prescription drugs? Do you see a lot of overdoses in the hospital?
With prescription drugs, that usually affects the kids. And for the same reasons that we were just talking about, the pill form, it looks like candy or something, and they'll go in and they'll use their parents' prescription drugs and come in overdosed. Also the syrups, we have cough syrups that have codeine, and so we'll see that. We'll see some of the Xanax, that type of, because again, the pill form that the kids get in the film. So what we try to do is tell parents to create barriers to prevent their children.
Barriers.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the syrups, and in hip-hop culture, scissor is very popular. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a dangerous drug that we see on the streets, and we see it sold over social media. I'm thinking of a case where we saw it sold on Instagram, distributed throughout the United States. So yes, something that is very concerning.
For the people at home who may not know what scissor is, can one of you tell us?
I mean, promethazine or a cough syrup with codeine in it. Sometimes mixed with soda or with a soft drink and drinking.
And are you seeing more of this?
We see it, yeah. It hasn't eclipsed fentanyl, but we are seeing a little bit more of the scissops, the cough syrups and stuff like that, though, yeah. Yeah.
It's really, really sad. The DEA just issued an alert on Trank. What is Trank?
Trank is xylazine, a veterinary sedative that really has right now, no accepted medical use in the United States. So it's not a scheduled drug, meaning it's not a controlled drug that DEA has authority over. Right now, the Food and Drug Administration has authority over regulating it. I think about 2 years ago now, the DEA requested that the Department of Health and Human Services begin the process to schedule the drug. I say all this because that drug is now being mixed with fentanyl, and it's appearing in the retail drug world. Now, why would somebody mix xylazine with fentanyl? They're doing it to make a slight change to the psychoactive effects of fentanyl. Fentanyl's a very fast-hitting, short-acting opioid, right? And they're trying to make the high from fentanyl more akin to the high from heroin or an oxycodone. So trying to make the person feel that euphoria or high longer. That's what xylazine does. So the reality is, as dangerous as it is, there are some people that are actually seeking that out and looking for xylazine mixed with fentanyl to get that extended effect, perhaps because it's more similar to heroin, the opiate that they were used to taking, which in some cities or some drug markets you can't even find anymore.
Trank use has been on the rise among the unhoused, correct?
Correct.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think it's just because, as I said, it's taking the place of heroin. Here's why. Drug trafficking organizations want to sell the most profitable drug. Heroin, to grow poppy plants, requires land. It requires control of that land. That land has to be in a specific climate. They need people in the fields to score the plants, scrape the gum, manufacture the base. With fentanyl, you don't need any of that. All you need is access to the chemicals. You can mix the chemicals in a garage. You can move it from one place to another if law enforcement was moving in on you. And there's no limit to the quantity you can produce. You're not relying on a growing season or Mother Nature. So they've decided to make fentanyl the opiate drug that they sell. Adding xylazine to it is just something to try to make the effects a little bit more, in my opinion, a little bit more heroin-like, or to make that high last out a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the criminal world is coming up with new methods every day to make these drugs and get them into the U.S. So how is the DEA addressing this?
I mean, our number one thing is going after the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco New Generation cartel. They're the people that are bringing these drugs into the United States. And we do that primarily in two ways. One is, especially here in LA, at the wholesale level. There are individuals bringing 1 million fake prescription pills into the area at a time. And, you know, we've made several seizures of 1 million fake pills in one location. Also, 100 kilogram quantities of powdered fentanyl. Those are the people that are causing the issue. Our logic is, our strategy is, address the problem where it's causing the most harm. The wholesale level is one way we can do that. When we address the drug supply, we're reducing the drug harm. The other place is where it's actually causing deaths in the community. We have something called our Overdose Justice Task Force. If someone sells a drug that kills someone, we will investigate that death, try to trace the drugs back to the dealer, and charge them with a significant federal crime, drug distribution resulting in death, which can carry a 20-year federal prison sentence. It is a long sentence. And I know that a lot of people in our community, just to be blunt, aren't comfortable with that. We're putting someone in jail for selling a small amount of drugs. Here's the rationale for that. There's a very real case, and it's not that uncommon. I just speak about this one because it's been adjudicated and it's open to the public. One drug dealer in Pasadena in one weekend caused 7 overdoses and 3 deaths. And my question to people is, what happens the next weekend if law enforcement doesn't intervene and file a case on that person?
Dr. Jones, in the ER, what has changed since 2020 when we were in the height of the pandemic, and now? What are you seeing?
An exponential rise in opiate overdoses, and I mean exponential. So it's been a significant rise.
Is it among teenagers, adults?
It's among all groups, amongst all groups that we see.
When you see teenagers in particularly, what symptoms are they suffering from?
Teenagers, like adults, there's one final common pathway to an overdose victim. And so they have the opiate overdose triad, and that would be an individual who has pinpoint pupils, respiratory depression, and who is in an unconscious state. And so when they come in, if they haven't received Narcan in the field, which when you have those three, you assume that someone has an opiate overdose. The paramedics carry Narcan. They will give them they'll give them a dose of Narcan.
Almost the first thing that first responders do now, anytime someone presents, is it's almost like Narcan is administered extremely frequently now. Extremely frequently. It's almost the first thing you do when you encounter someone who's showing those signs of respiratory distress. Administer Narcan, you know, and do that first.
Mm-hmm. If you're not on an opiate, it won't harm you.
Right.
But if you're on it's life-saving if you're in a pending opiate overdose. So.
Mm-hmm. And when these people come into the hospital, do you immediately recognize the symptoms?
As a trauma surgeon, sometimes we don't, but we presume that if an individual comes in with those three constellations, that we have to treat the opioid as well as treating the traumatic event. So we presume that if a person has pinpoint pupils, respiratory depression, and is in an unconscious state, then it's opiate overdose until proven otherwise. And that's why the initial thing we do is we give them the Narcan. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, and in a parallel, we have to treat them as a trauma patient.
Do you see us turning a corner anytime soon?
I actually do. In some areas. So one example where I feel that education and awareness has made an impact is older drug users, maybe in their late 30s, 40s, people who use cocaine recreationally. What we were seeing in 2020, 2021, what we would call overdose clusters. Probably the most well-known case was in Florida. It was some West Point cadets that were on spring break, and several of them used what they thought was cocaine. It contained fentanyl, and there were multiple overdoses. I think we've reached that portion of our population, and they're aware of the dangers now, and either they're testing the cocaine or they've just made the decision not to use cocaine and to use perhaps a different drug recreationally. I say that because the price of cocaine is very low right now, almost a 20 to 25 year low. So there's just not that much demand for it right now. Hopefully we can make that same impact now with the younger people who are kind of experimenting in drugs, that are just getting into the drug scene, and get that knowledge to them so that they can make better decisions too.
Mm-hmm. I want to circle back to the prescription drugs. If someone has them in their home and they've expired, what's the best way to get rid of them?
Check DEAtakeback.com, and that's a website that DEA runs. It provides locations where you can go turn those drugs in. It's important not to flush them down the toilet. It's important not to throw them in the trash, and I get it. People want to get them out of their homes because they recognize the safety risk, but that's really not the best, most environmentally friendly way to do it. When we collect them at DEA, we have an EPA-approved method of destroying them that's the friendliest to the environment, and it gets them out of the home, because unfortunately a lot of times that's where, and the doctor might have alluded to it earlier, that's where a lot of this drug use may start. It may start with a Xanax prescription that was left over, or an oxycodone or Percocet prescription that was left over from a previous medical condition. Kids may take those pills, and then when they run out, they're going to search for them through the illicit chain, and that's where they're getting the counterfeit pills, the fake pills.
Wow, it's really disturbing. On Skid Row, what is the most widely used drug? Because I've heard meth, I've heard trank.
I think meth, and just from my opinion, the effects of meth in our community, in my opinion, are as great as the effects of fentanyl. It's just we're not seeing it instantaneously. It's a long process of unfortunate substance use disorder, resulting in mental health issues, resulting in homelessness. It's a path that meth takes these people down. The harm eventually comes, unfortunately, at the end of it, but it's a longer process than fentanyl, where it could be one use and it takes your life.
How are these drugs getting to Skid Row? I mean, are there dealers living there?
There are dealers that actually commute from the suburbs, and we've done criminal cases on them. They wake up in the morning, they get in their BMW, they drive downtown to Los Angeles, set up shop in the Skid Row area, and sell drugs for the day, and then go home at the end of the day. So it's victimization, and that's what I tell people. Don't forget that there are victims of drug crimes. It's not a victimless crime. There are people that wake up in the morning and make the conscious decision to go to Skid Row, feed the addiction, victimize people just for profit.
Are you working with the city to address this?
Yeah, we have. We've definitely worked with the city, and we've done special projects in that area to try to address it.
You know, how do you get the word out to the unhoused that this is very, very dangerous, particularly meth and fentanyl?
I think from our part, we rely on service providers in the area, and we partner a lot with treatment centers, with service providers, and also the Los Angeles Police Department has some officers that have tremendous relationships with people in that area, and we also use them as conduits to the community.
Mm-hmm. With the change in administration in Washington a couple of years ago, did the DEA's approach change at all?
Not really. No, I wouldn't say it did. Hey, we're always trying to address the problem where it's causing the harm, and I think it's apparent that Skid Row is one of those areas.
Mm-hmm. And what about you? Does your hospital, do you work with the city government at all?
Oh, absolutely. So the hospital, if you come in and you've been the victim of an overdose incident, then we try to capture that. We try to embrace. We don't try to shame and blame the individual. What we try to do is create a harm-free environment, and then if they're ready to then change their behavior, then we offer them services. And we have an individual at our hospital, and ironically, the Institute of Public Health Institute has given $40 million to California hospitals, and so 278 hospitals they've spent $40 million to create institutions to help combat substance abuse.
And when you say institutions?
The hospitals, the hospital level.
Okay, so can you elaborate?
So, like I said, 278 hospitals in California got a share of the $40 million to, number one, create substance abuse programs within their hospital. Number two, hire what we call these substance use navigators. And those are individuals, social workers and whatnot, that help individuals, families find treatment programs if they're in crisis and use drugs and things like that.
Okay, so they're offering referrals,
correct,
counseling, and referrals.
All of that. Yes,
but in terms of rehab, then folks are sent somewhere else.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, an impactful thing that I saw Mayor Bass just speak on was the length of inpatient treatment. Because I've heard from a lot of, mostly I deal with parents who have children that are in recovery, that have tried recovery, and the complaint I often hear is 30 days of inpatient treatment, 60 days of inpatient treatment is not enough. Sometimes perhaps that's all insurance will cover. I've heard Mayor Bass now talk about the city partnering and doing 6-month treatment programs inpatient. I think that's phenomenal, and that's going to be one of the keys to get through this.
Do you work with the mayor's office at all?
No, not really, no.
Is that something that you would like to see happen?
Absolutely, absolutely, because I feel like we do have information to offer. We have information to offer about what's happening on the streets and what's in the illicit drug supply chain, and I think, I think that information is valuable for decision makers.
Well, we are just about out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here to discuss this very important issue of the drug epidemic in Los Angeles. Bill Bodner, DEA Special Agent in charge here in Los Angeles, and Dr. Reginald Jones, trauma surgeon. Definitely a lively conversation. I am Anita Bennett, and thank you for watching this edition of LA Currents. Have a great day.